Hello, welcome back. I should say welcome back, though it's been quite a long time. Welcome to At Base, the live radio show brought to you by the People and Culture Association. And joining today are three fantastic guests. But once again, the At Base is an online radio show hosted by the People and Culture Association, which is a vibrant and a fast growing global community of people professionals and many others. And the purpose of the PCA, of course, is to promote purpose driven, values based, and person centered workplace cultures. Now, the live show is intended to bring an audience an unrehearsed, unabashed, unfiltered, unscripted perspective on trending workplace culture news with the trailblazer voices in the industry. And of course, thank you so much, Nikki, for scrambling this together for us. I know this has been a topic that we thought we might address a little later. We had another episode planned to restart season two of At Base, but this is something we cannot keep on the back burner anymore. We know that this is very important. This has to be addressed. We need to, they say, grab the bully by the horn now and address the situation in the room. So there's a lot to be discussed, of course, but I just want to say, first of all, thank you to our guest speakers who have joined us. Let me start off by saying thanks to David Hull, who is the founder of Abe and Rush People Solutions. We also have Nikki Ayer joining us from Conduct Change, and David Dill, of course, the CEO and founder of the TCM Group. And all our three guest speakers are very much active on LinkedIn, so please do go check their profiles out and follow their journey. But today, we want to talk about something that's very, very important to us, something that's really destroying workplace cultures, destroying workplace productivity. And I thought we should start off with something ridiculous, right? Because that's how we like to do it at the At Pace show. And this is about um, the CBI situation that was in the news for quite some time regarding the Confederation of British Industry, where a woman employee alleged that a male colleague once told her that everyone should be bullied once in their lifetime. Quite an outrageous statement that was reported in the Telegraph recently. I'm wondering, and this goes out to, of course, all the speakers out there. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this? For something like this to be said, for something like this to be even encouraged, do you think that, or why do you think that bullying is patronized in some organizations, and does it have to do anything with culture?
Shall I jump in first?
Absolutely.
Go for it.
So first of all, I would say that I would not wish being bullied on anybody. Having been through it myself, then it is not something that I would encourage anybody to experience if they don't have to. And so that's, it's quite a dangerous statement to make, that, isn't it? On the other hand, it has, really driven my career and made me passionate about this subject. So maybe some good did come from it for me, but it was quite a way to go about it. So definitely don't recommend it. In terms of why is it allowed in some organisations? Wow, entrenched behaviours, people bringing in huge sums of money and therefore allowed to get away with whatever behaviour they like, because it's all about what they can bring in terms of the finances to the organisation. That's just my starter for 10. I'm going to let the other guys come in. I'm just going to go David and let you fight it out amongst yourselves.
David, I'll let the other David. Who's
that one down there? Very kind. I mean, that's an amazing statement, really, isn't it? You should be bullied once in your lifetime. And I'd love to explore where it came from, what organisation that came from that actually kind of justifies bullying and treating somebody in such a detrimental way that causes harm. I mean, that person who's gone through bullying will have mental health problems, potentially physical health problems that go hand in hand with it. That's a person, that's a human being. So how can you justify that? So I'd love to dig into where that statement came from and why it was made and who made it. That's my kind of policing background, I suppose, and wanting to kind of investigate a little bit more. There is something that we use, and we go back to Dabrowski, and there's a theory of positive disintegration. And I think, touching on what Nikki said, that having been through bullying myself within the police service, there are some people that come back stronger, having reflected on what they've been through. and why they've been through it and try and gain that context. But I would never, ever say bullying is an experience to go through. It's trauma-based, basically, that positive disintegration. It sounds kind of a misnomer there, but some people will fall badly and be harmed by that experience of trauma. Some will bounce back stronger and reflect on it, as I say. So there's a huge amount to investigate and explore and surface from that one quote you made there, Jonathan.
I think I mean, I think you introduced it, Jonathan, by saying it's a ridiculous starting point, and it really is. I mean, the idea of having a rite of passage, but your rite of passage is that you should experience bullying as part of your kind of career development, just seems it is as ridiculous and ludicrous as it sounds. You know, what about giving people an opportunity to experience compassion and dialogue and positive engagement? You know, those are the things that are often missing in our workplaces. And if, as one might allude from this statement, that it kind of, you know, toughens your mettle and makes you a kind of better performing employee. Again, it suggests that it's kind of riddled with flaws as a statement, because, you know, all of the evidence that we see in relation to the impact of bullying on and incivility and those adverse behaviours on another person is actually the complete opposite effect of delivering good business outcomes and helping us to be the best versions of ourselves, to be productive. So I think if a manager is stating that your rite of passage is you should experience bullying once in your lifetime, one questions the very motivations that underpin the concept of management, because surely the manager's job or the leader's job in any organization is to drive business performance and drive individual and collective performance. And all of the evidence, you know, you haven't got to go scratching far beneath the surface, is the complete opposite is true. So it is as ridiculous a statement as you suggested it was, I think, at the outset. And I think it was from the CBI, I think you said, Jonathan.
Yeah, so this was something that was an allegation made against one of the colleagues at the CBI. And I know we understand all on this call that, you know, these are some of the more the bigger stories that get the highlights from the press, from the media, and that's why they are scattered all across our Google searches now. But there are other stories. There are others who do not get that kind of, I would say, attention and to their struggles and to the fact that they are going through all this, and maybe it's not someone who's comfortable coming out. So there's so much more going out there. But even the statement by itself, as ridiculous as it sounds, we've all been through this, whether it's on our schools or, you know, colleges or universities, where you were into that kind of situation where you were probably challenged, right? And today people are saying not everything that comes across challenging is bullying. So who draws the line? Where is the line? And that's where we're moving into our next kind of question now, is what really constitutes bullying? What does it really mean to be bullied, right? And I know this sounds, once again, it almost seems like I'm trivializing this question, but for a lot of people, then I know as we build up to this, you know, because we're always so trying to distinguish between bullying and harassment at some stage. But I want to kind of set context to this in the sense that this was in one of, and this is where we're moving into another, I would say, story that got quite the press, and that was the former Deputy Prime Minister resigning just last week, I believe. And Dominic Raab actually, in his resignation letter, says, in one of the paragraphs, he says, "In setting the threshold for bullying so low, this inquiry has set a dangerous precedent." So very interesting line there once again. And he says the threshold for bullying so low. So what really constitutes bullying, guys? I mean, you'll have been in the space, you'll have worked with so many organizations. Let's start with David Howell on this one.
I was going to push that one towards Nikki, because of the work that she's doing in that legislation piece is we'll outline it and define it, and she's, I'm going to say, she's far better at that than me. So you probably best get the initial. Sorry, Nikki, I've pushed that one off my shoulder.
David. Yeah. So bullying behaviours, it's a huge spectrum of bullying behaviours. I think that's what we have to be really clear about. And it can start with those small levels of rudeness and incivility. It can go up to a range of behaviours, physical, verbal, psychological, that actually start to injure the other person, particularly where there's a pattern of behaviour. I think what was really interesting, you know, when you read Dominic Raab's letter of resignation, He's basically saying that all of the findings were flawed. This is a man who's, I think, obviously didn't expect to be found, any of the complaints to be upheld, and therefore put his job on the line, and then discovered that he had to resign as a result. So I think there's a level of emotion in this letter where he's pushing back, and we've seen that a lot. But what he's actually saying is that the findings in that report set the threshold for bullying so low. So when he is being told that his behaviour, other people find it intimidating, that he's introduced a punitive element, there's all sorts of different aspects in the report that you can pull out, but he's basically not accepting any of that. And he's saying that actually everybody should be able to put up with this in the workplace. Even though he describes himself as impatient, which I don't think is a great asset to have as a leader. I think what he's saying is he doesn't believe that was bullying. And so from his perspective, the bar has been set really low. Now, for the people on the receiving end of that behaviour, that bar probably hasn't been set low enough, if you like. It's probably still too high. There were things in that report that were dismissed that other people would find quite intimidating. So banging the hand on a desk, that was dismissed. For me, I would not find that a pleasant experience at all. So I think we need to kind of, accept that this is his perception on where the threshold is. But what we do not have is that clarity. And again, when you go to the Adam Tolley report, he's had to go to, several different places to decide which definition of bullying he's going to use to measure against in this case. We really, really need to get that clarification, both for employees and employers, because at the moment, people don't know how to judge it. They don't know the complexities that are involved in these cases. We need to absolutely get that clarified in law. And we're hoping that actually a private members bill will be brought through later this year. So in May, they're going to try and get a private members bill started to actually get legislation, workplace bullying recognised in UK legislation, and Conduct Change are under the Stop Hurt at Work banner, working with an MP to try and help push that through. So it's a really, really important area to get clarity on.
I think everything that Nikki said is really, really powerful. I think the challenge I see, and so I'm going to kind of try to sort of think a little bit from my work in work of mediation and restorative practice, but also here at TCM, we run a very significant number of investigations through our investigation company. So I see when we get into that investigative stage and that formal stage, and then obviously within the stage that we were experiencing more recently with Dominic Raab, where it's very much in the public arena, we see these positions being adopted and deny and defend, and often the sense that they were defending the indefensible. And it sounds ridiculous that we get into these positions. And then these lines need to be drawn, these very clearly defined lines need to be drawn because of that formal process. So I'm going to kind of go a little bit further into to cases and think about my work in mediation and restorative practice, because oftentimes what we find in those cases is the parties themselves are able to define some of the lines. And obviously organisations who have clearly defined behavioural frameworks and processes to support them. But through a mediation and restorative process, for instance, the parties might talk about the behaviours that they've experienced and start to express that to the other person in terms of the impact of that, and talk about their feelings, their goals, their needs, and actually starting to have a conversation. And so what I also see, as well as the sort of more formal routes where we do need these very clearly defined lines which express very clearly the acceptable and unacceptable behaviours in the workplace, there's also, I think, balancing up against that opportunities for parties to come to have conversations. And what I think is very sad in the case with Dominic Raab is he was, so I understand, being given feedback from senior civil servants and colleagues about the impact of his behaviour. The word bullying was being avoided to be used, which I actually think I agree with, because I think it can antagonise the situation. that's another point which I think we should explore, is at what point do we start to introduce that language? But he then disregarded that advice and then chose, so it would appear, and opted then to continue with that behavior. And I think it's at that moment in time that a Rubicon rather is being crossed. And actually we then do need to have very clear definitions. But prior and up to that point, I think the parties in a situation can define those behaviors and begin to construct a framework for behaving which is appropriate to all parties.
There's a huge amount there, excuse me, and touching on some of those points there, there's a huge, for him and for government, there's a huge opportunity missed there to taken a step back and reflected and said, right, I'm going to take this on the chin, if you like, and look at what people are saying, learn from it, and that's where you get that positive kind of change that you can actually draw from that I'm going to listen to this, and I'm going to work with the people that I've potentially hurt in this and understand the experiences they've had because of my behavior, and talk through that. And one thing, Nikki, as well, that we see often, and I'm sure David as well, is that bullying can be quite, very manipulative, and people don't even realize they've been bullied. Certainly in those kind of constructive dismissals where it's been a slow kind of death by 1,000 cuts almost, that they've worked people and managed people out of organizations. And finally that point where there's that point that potentially they could have been a victim themselves in the circumstance and experience they had, but they crossed that line that they haven't learned. Certainly in my experience, where I was asked to be a whistleblower within policing, that person eventually at the senior level had a final written warning. Okay, there's your opportunity to learn. That's that time to take a step back and say, crikey, who am I? And that self-awareness piece there, with help as well and assistance. But to then have gone on and continued that behavior and bullying behavior to hurt other people is really indefensible, really. And what I saw was that a lot of these instances, the problem person, should we say, or the issue is kicked down the road. It's somebody else's problem. It's not in my radar. I don't have to deal with it. So over you go. We'll promote you. We'll change your department and move you elsewhere. And they continue. And that's the sad thing. We could have had this opportunity back here, upstream, to deal with it. We've allowed it to carry on and hurt more people as a consequence. And that's really indefensible, really. Unless you have that, you've got to have that real context behind it to understand what's gone on and why it's gone on.
There's some fantastic insights coming in, and thank you so much. Once again, for those of you who have just joined us, you are at the At Pace live radio show brought to you by the People and Culture Association. I want to touch upon what David Howell just said about a missed opportunity, and kind of to drag us back to the same question we're kind of trying to figure out is, and I think, Nikki, you mentioned this as well, and while we were preparing for this, was about the intent and impact kind of factors that are coming in. It seems like there is that bit of denial in his statement that's been put out there, and which might be quite genuine in many senses. And we are not here to take sides. I think one of our goals at the People and Culture Association is to address these very difficult topics, which can be quite sensitive and quite delicate, but we need to ask the questions, and our role is to ask the questions. And if there is that genuine kind of denial that's coming through where he or it could be anyone else. At the start of the show, we said there are hundreds of these cases that people are struggling with on a daily basis, but these are the ones that come out in the media. But coming back to his statement, and if it's genuine denial, it feels like there is that kind of it seems like there's a thick line between what constitutes bullying and what does not constitute bullying. So I just want to get a bit more clarity on that, for especially for people who are leaders and managers in the workplace. How do they kind of see through these kind of situations?
I mean, just for me, I would be really interested to hear Nikki's thoughts. For me, it is a really interesting point because I get asked this all the time. What's the difference between a challenge conversation, a performance conversation, and bullying? And I think there is a really challenging area, and I'm really interested to understand how we can define that in a legislative environment. So for me, it's not it's almost the challenge for me is it is almost case by case, because some people perceive things in a particular way and it can be quite subjective. So I think there is an element of impact. So if I'm having a challenge conversation with a colleague or an employee, and I'm seeking to help them to be the best versions of themselves to drive up performance, then I can have that challenge conversation with the intention there is to help them to be better, to be the best version of themselves. And I can do that with challenge, but I can also do that with compassion and empathy. But I can also call out the things that I think aren't working and give suggestions about things that I can. If the intention behind that challenge conversation is to undermine, belittle, destroy the self-esteem of that individual, to somehow hurt or harm them, then that's a very deliberate action that I've taken. So there's a challenge, there's an issue there around that intention. I think where it starts to move into the bullying space is where that individual or a representative or someone else says, look, David or whoever, that behavior, that thing that you've just done has hurt or harmed or upset that other individual. And then I continue to choose to work in that way. So my intention was harmful or not, it's caused harm. And then I'm made aware of that and I continue. And it feels to me, and I would be really interested to hear Nikki's thoughts on it. It feels to me now that is starting to move into a very clear definition of bullying, in as much as it's both the intention and the impact. And then there's a choice that's being made. And I see that playing out. I suppose the other thing I would say is I do see people make really bad choices about how they manage. I see it every day. We really make bad choices. And there's another challenge for me, I think, in terms of bullying is when are we making really bad choices, and then can we learn to make better choices tomorrow? And how do we differentiate the bad choices of a good person rather than the deliberate choices of a bad actor? And that's always been a challenge for me in terms of my work in my work. But again, I'm probably asking more questions and answering, Jonathan, so that's sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nikki.
I was going to say there are quite a lot of questions in there. I'm going to go back to the first bit about, I think you're absolutely right in terms of if somebody if something's brought to somebody's attention about their behaviour and they don't make any attempt to change, they continue to work in that way, they know that it's having a detrimental impact on others, and absolutely bullying. My approach is always that when there is an issue with behaviour, then if it's two parties involved, or if it's a leader who is the word they chose to use for Dominic Raab was abrasive. It's kind of like, they're bullying behaviours. The fact that you're using them to everybody doesn't stop them being bullying behaviours. I think when you go back to the intent, some people may not have the intent to intimidate, humiliate and undermine, but the way in which they deliver it has that impact. And I think that is when you might come with thinking you've got the best of intentions and you want to help grow this person and develop them, but you don't actually deliver that in such a way that it is constructive, that it builds them up, that it helps to grow them, it helps to develop them. It becomes quite personal as well, when it becomes a personal attack. You didn't do this and you didn't do that, when you're calling people out in front of other people, when you're humiliating people by, stating that their work was woeful in front of everybody else, then that does not have the best intent. Your intention might be to improve the standards, but the way in which it is done has a significant impact. And we can really see the way there's been a shift away from intent to impact in the definitions. So if you look at the definitions from ACAS, they were originally based on a judge, Sir Robert Nelson, tried to actually define bullying, and this was back in 2014, and they talked about intent at that point. So ACAS originally had that in there, intended to undermine, humiliate, denigrate or injure the recipient. They then took intended out, and they've recently changed it again to say that it's unwanted behaviour. And it's, the abuse or misuse of power has always been in there, but it undermines, humiliates, or causes physical or emotional harm to someone. So in just 9 years, that definition has shifted away from intent and very much towards the impact and the harm that it causes.
Really interesting.
David reminded me of an Einstein quote about the questions, that if he had an hour to solve a problem his life depended on it, he'd spend 55 minutes seeking the right question and 5 minutes to solve it. So
Yeah.
I think it's key that we keep asking those questions, because the answer is in one of those. And moving on from there is that the work we're doing with complexity, I think, comes into this part of the discussion and dialogue, is that following the route back and looking at the root cause here, we have too many leaders that are overextended in their competency, pushed beyond their limits, in burnout, which is another common thing at the moment. And that's where a lot of those bad decisions are coming from, because they're trapped in positions they shouldn't be there. Because what we haven't done is aligned the complexity of the role with the complexity that they can handle, what we call the innate talent complexity of the individual, which we can measure. And so many times we're working with teams and we're using their experiences, so it becomes non-judgmental. So we move away from that pointing of fingers. And it's your fault, you're to blame for this. As soon as you go to that position, you've lost. You've lost the energy in the room, you've lost the potential. And so many times we put people with each other and the answers are in the room. If you open the discussion up and allow people to talk and express through their experiences what they're going through, be it work, leadership, task, their resilience, mental emotions, etc., then these things come out and they solve it themselves. But again, it's finding the right questions to throw into that pot, if you like, to actually nurture the right responses. And people sit there and think, I didn't know that. I didn't realize you were going through that. I didn't realize you had problems at home. I didn't realize, and we've had this before, you didn't like the job. You don't want to be there. You could be doing something else. You're only there because it's paying the wages. So that has a huge context in around how people behave. So moving away from behaviors and looking deeper again as to what is causing those behaviors, what's underneath. And so many times we don't talk, and this is probably, I'm going to steal this from Jane Gunn, and I'll put a plug there. We talk least about the things that matter the most. And until we do, we can't actually provide that change. But that change comes from the people there in that room. It's just finding it. But the solutions that we're looking at with the app that we're just about to bring out, and understanding those experiences individually, because that from an individual, you then look at a team, then you look at an organization. We can even pull out bullying and narcissism now as well through some of the stuff we're doing. And it's utterly fascinating, but it comes down to the individual as well, the individual in that team, because they make up that team. So it's, people again, isn't it? Fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's actually a really nice comment coming in our LinkedIn chat box where Jennifer Foster says, what is bullying? It's repeated inappropriate behavior that undermines your right to dignity at work. An isolated incident is not considered to be bullying. It usually takes place over a period of time. And of course, she said this is the Irish definition of workplace bullying. But I think once again, there is a bit of confusion. Is that bullying? And Nikki, you actually laid that out very clearly in your response earlier about what constitutes. But some people would consider that to be harassment, and we know that harassment is very clearly unlawful. But is bullying unlawful? Because I remember when we did the first season of At Pace last year, we had this really good argument about the fact that a lot of people get away with bullying because there is no proper legislation to deter it. Would you agree with that? And of course, both the Davids come in on that as well. But let's start with you, Nikki. Is there enough legislation to kind of deter this kind of behavior?
Yeah, harassment and bullying are treated very differently in the law. And actually, colloquially, a lot of people use the words interchangeably. And we have to be really clear that actually in the law, harassment is bullying linked to a protected characteristic. And so that is all protected under the Equality Act. If somebody is harassed in the workplace, they can bring a complaint while they're still in their job. They're protected from, not even day one, they're protected from recruitment stage. And they can claim for injury to feelings as well. if you are the target of workplace bullying, then you have to have been in your job for at least 2 years before you have any protection. You then have to resign to be able to bring a claim. You can't bring a workplace bullying claim to the employment tribunal. It has to be something like an unfair or constructive dismissal. Very hard cases to win. Your other alternative is to have a psychiatric injury, and then you can claim through a personal injury claim through the civil courts. Those are your options at the moment. So it is an area where it really needs to be clarified in law, and everyone needs to have the same protection from day one in the workplace. They shouldn't have to leave their job to be able to hold an employer accountable for being bullied out of their job.
I mean, I think it's. I mean, it's. I think. I mean, I suppose as a people and culture association, there's a big kind of question here about the role that our people, professionals, and HR teams can play within our organisations. And I think for organisations who are getting this stuff right, they're starting to have really good quality conversations within the organisations. And whilst I think looking at the sort of statutory and legal instruments for this are key, I think it's really important that we don't defer to government to make decisions and create rules that actually we can begin to develop in our own organisations. And I think I would be certainly suggesting to people and culture professionals and HR teams to look at some of the systems and processes we have. I call them the GBH policies, grievance, bullying and harassment policies. They are the incubators of toxicity. And to an extent, when we look at some of the processes and policies in our organisations, they are adversarial, they are abrasive, they are corrosive. And so those language and that we talked about, the bullying behaviours to describe Dominic Raab, are actually the very intrinsic features of many of the systems that exist within our organisations. So looking at and I completely agree with you, David, in terms of giving people the capacity and the space and that innate ability to resolve issues. And I would certainly be saying to organisations, yes, let's look at that external environment through the tribunals, of course. But I don't have an awful lot of confidence in the law. The law is an ass in many of these cases. And I think internally, when organisations start to look at their internal system, so looking at their leadership and management capabilities, is compassion, is empathy a core capability? Do we design it into the jobs? Do we design it into the recruitment processes? Do we design it into our onboarding processes? Do we value it within the employee value proposition? Do we look at our HR processes? Are they GBH? Do they take people out and give them a good kicking because they're adversarial and divisive? They polarize the parties and entrench bad behaviors? Or do we create those spaces and those moments that matter for people to be able to come together and have dialogue and conversations? I think when we look at those organizations which are focusing more on resolution and dignity, diversity, respect, civility, and creating an environment for that to happen, we would need less of a safety net of legislation. Whilst I can see the value of legislation, I don't think we can subcontract business needs, business processes, and the needs of our people to the law. I think it would worry me enormously, and I think there is a risk, I think, of organisations saying, "Well, that's great; it's taken care of as a legal construct." I would say to those employers right now, no. Let's start looking at what we're doing internally and repurpose and remodel and rethink how we're doing things so that the law provides the safety net, but we're doing it properly because we want to do it and we need to do it.
I'll only enhance that. And for me, it's a two-pronged approach. I won't say attack. Attack's the wrong word, but it's from both ends of the issue. And I've been using Desmond Tutu's quote very frequently recently, that we need to stop pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. Because at the moment, I don't even think we're pulling people out of the river. I think we're just watching them go by. Yeah. And I think, yes, legislation has got a part to play in it. But as you say, it's that adversarial kind of element to it. And how many people actually really want to go to that point? Because it is a frightening thought. It adds problems to the trauma that they've been through, potentially additional mental health problems, financial, future careers, family, finance. It's all in there. It's those feedback loops that person has got to go through. Are they in the right mental
These are some fantastic insights coming in. Nikki, sorry, I just want to carry on.
Just to jump in very quickly there to say that we know that legislation is only one part of the picture. Legislation doesn't stop things happening, it just provides consequences if it does. We also know that the courts are overwhelmed. Very few people are well enough to even go to a tribunal. They're incredibly damaging. We don't want people to go there. And as well as kind of looking at the individuals involved, we need to look at working practices. Which working practices are more likely to open an organisation up to bullying complaints? And, there could be all manner of different things in there, but it's very much about the way in which they give people control, autonomy over their work, the way in which they provide the training, information, support that they need, the equipment. Is everything there? Did they get everything that they need? Are middle managers being crushed from both direction by demands and pressures? Are they being actually trained how to deal with people issues? All of these things come into it. There is so much that organisations can do before we go to those processes. And I never ever ask people to go to formal processes. Everything that I do is about preventing them from getting there.
Just seen some questions there around the language of bullying as well, and it's for me is a really interesting one, because when I'm working with organisations and we talk about what are the defining characters of the culture of the organisation, it's the behaviours of our leaders and the behaviours that they're willing to tolerate, and it's how it feels to work there. Well, the feelings are often the F word. We don't talk about our emotions and feelings. And when it comes to behaviours, the only time we ever list behaviours is on a list of gross misconduct. And if you do not do this, or if you do that, you will be dismissed. So organisations, I think, again, the ones that are getting this right, and I think I take the point that the person made around bullying behaviours should be called bullying behaviours. But actually, let's start to break that down and understand what are the behaviours we want to see, that we need to see in our organisation to thrive, and which are the ones that we don't want to see. And how can we support our managers and leaders and colleagues and others to demonstrate those behaviours which are aligned to the organisation and challenge ones which are misaligned? But oftentimes we don't even clarify what the behaviours are that we do want to see or we don't want to see. We just rely on guesswork, we rely on subjective analysis, we rely on discretion, and that's inconsistent, it's inappropriate, and it's unsafe. And I think some of those conversations around behaviours, emotions, feelings, we need to bring that into our organisations. And that's where I think the language can become very powerful, rather than simply having these, I'm not saying we shouldn't use the word bullying, but there are other ways of defining the right and the wrong behaviour. So I just saw that question. I thought I'd just respond to it.
I just want to wrap up the thought on the legislation. I know that this debate can go on forever, and some will argue that legislation can actually deter bullying behaviour, and there'll be others will argue saying that legislation might actually encourage more formal processes. And I know that all of us here are more about tackling this much before it really escalates, tackling it, nipping it in the bud. And I want to wrap up this because I know that we can go on about this. We're so passionate about trying to stop these kind of toxic workplaces, and all of our guest speakers today are working hard in their own spaces to make that work. But I think there's this very simple question that I would like to pose to the three of you, and that is, and because I think there might be a lot of our viewers joining us today who are either in a position where they have faced a challenging situation, either in a sense of being bullied or feeling being bullied, or being on the other side where you have been alleged, maybe not formally, but at least in passing, of being a bully. And we sometimes use that as a tease, and it might not always be a tease. It might be something serious. So the question is, what do you do if you're feeling bullied at work? And what do you do if you are being alleged or accused of being a bully? And this is in a more serious situation, not something that is said lightheartedly. So, David, Howell, can I start with you this time?
Yes, I won't dodge this one. I won't pass it. If you're feeling you're being bullied, I think for me, and on reflection as well, is one to take a step back and to look what's going on and try and what we call join some dots, because bullying can be very isolating. You think it's only you that are going through it. Invariably, it's other people as well. So it's find people to talk to that you can trust and have that time with, and to talk these things through, because it becomes a very emotional thing as well. And I found that, and that's perhaps to my detriment when I went through it, that you feel like you've got to win, and that's probably that adversarial element to it. So I took some fantastic advice from Professor Clive Boddy, actually, in a fantastic book he wrote in Climate of Fear and Corporate Psychopathy. And it's damn hard to actually try and not to be emotional and not get triggered by the emotion, because people will try and trigger you. And then you fall into their trap. You prove the point that you're unsuitable for the role, or whatever goes with that. So, and jot these things down. Very, very basic. It's very basic, but we kind of, and I again fell into that trap. I wish I'd written the things down when they happened. It was only till afterwards I drew up a huge spider map, and it was frightening how many dots I kind of joined up, how many people I'd spoken to, how many people had gone through the similar experiences to me. But we see, and the police, again, going back to the police, they're terrible, aren't they? We're trained in investigation, and when it happens to ourselves, we're the last kind of the worst at investigating what's happening to ourselves. It's kind of quite a strange paradox, really. But I say, if I go with one thing, is take a step back, deep breath, try as best you can to take the emotion out of it, and assess what's around you. And if you are going to jump in and make a complaint and things like that, look at all the feedback loops that you've got: family, finance, career, and look at that as a whole, because it's so easy just to jump in and then kind of follow its course, and that can be dangerous for a lot of people.
Brilliant, thanks. Nikki?
Yes, so for me, I think, if I think back to my own experience, one of the things was that I remember actually that first moment when I felt bullied, but there was really a case of denial. Oh, that can't be right. I'm a strong woman in a senior position. I can't possibly be bullied at work. That's ridiculous. And so sometimes it can be really hard to recognize it and to, talk about documenting it. And you mentioned that there, David, but sometimes it goes on for such a long time before you really understand what's happening to you, that actually you haven't done that. And I think one of the things that when I reflect back was that I actually didn't really understand bullying. I knew how I was feeling. I knew the impact it was having on me. But did I know what language to use to describe it? Did I know exactly what I meant by bullying? I thought my only choice was to go to the formal procedures. because you go and look at your policies and procedures. And so I followed those to the letter, and I put my faith in them because I assumed that they would be there for a reason to help people like me who'd been bullied. And that was probably, the biggest mistake. That's where the greatest damage was done. So actually I had some amazing people actually that I went to and I spoke to that I trusted, that tried to help me, but they were literally blocked every step of the way. And I think there's several bits of advice. So the first one I would say to anybody is consider your health first and foremost, because it's not weakness to walk away. It's not weakness to choose not to go through formal processes. It's incredibly damaging on people's health to do that. And therefore, if you would prefer to walk away, do that, but put your health first and foremost. And secondly, make sure you have an incredibly good support network around you, not just in the workplace, but externally as well. And then really it is just go and do a little bit of self-education on the subject. Go and find out a little bit more about it, because you tend to get very little training at the moment in the workplaces. And so there's a lot of resources out there that are available now, a lot more people talking about this subject. So go and learn a little bit more about what's going on, and ask for support in your workplace. It could be that you and the person you're in conflict with needs that one-to-one support first and foremost to be able to have that conversation together. But don't go to formal processes if you can possibly help it.
Thanks, Nikki. David Little, can I push you to answer the second part of the question more, actually? We want to play, kind of devil's advocate on both sides here.
Sure. I support what I've been hearing. I'm going to speak it. So I'm going to talk from a perspective of a mediation and restorative justice practitioner. I'm also going to talk from someone who subscribes to the school of naive idealism. And what I mean by that is I genuinely believe that people do not, on the whole, come to work to cause harm and distress. And I think I'm going to work on the basis that majority of people don't come to work to cause this harm. They don't come to work to do bad work, to cause this level of distress. So putting those principles together, restorative practices, that sort of unconditional positive regard, and that focus on dialogue, my advice to people is to do the thing that probably feels the most counterintuitive, is going to have a conversation with the person against whom you believe is the person who's bullying you. Now, you may need a mediator there, or a coach, or a facilitator. Over 90% of cases are resolved successfully through mediation, particularly where that mediation is undertaken as close to source as possible. And there are three things that I hear from mediation practice that I do. The first one is, it's this lovely sound effect, I did not know I was causing you. When I called you a waste of space, I didn't realise you would interpret that as to be less valuable than air, I suppose. Now I understand that's calling you a waste of space. You're going to interpret that way. It never occurred to me. So I won't do that again. That's the first thing that I hear is, I didn't realise. The second one is that people go, God, why didn't we have this conversation days, weeks, months ago? And it upsets me and frustrates me that the lack of facility in our organisations to give dialogue primacy, to get people talking and communicating. And the third thing is, people say this, it's nowhere near as bad as I was expecting. And we build the other up, and we build the situation up, and we build ourselves up. The self-other situation, the SOS of bullying, self-other situation. And if we can help people to work through that in a constructive but compassionate way, and I agree with one of the comments that was made easy, we cannot accept these as cultural norms in our organisations. That's not acceptable. You do not go to work, to cause harm, but you do not go to work to be shouted at or treated in the way that we've been seeing recently. So organisations need to stand up and challenge us, but it can be done through dialogue. So I would give dialogue primacy and create those spaces. And then the 10% of cases that can't be resolved through dialogue, absolutely. Those are the ones where we need to be able to take clear action to remedy that through a formal route.
Brilliant. David Howell, David Little, Yeah, thank you so much for making time today. I know we scrambled to put this together, but as we were saying, this is something that cannot just be, swept under the carpet.
No.
Bullying is real; it's happening, and we have, I think, tried to get to not to the bottom of it for sure, but try to address this in the most civil and sensible way possible. The At Pace radio show is now back. This is season 2. The next episode is going to be talking about immigration, diversity, and workplace culture. And it was supposed to be our first episode, but we pushed it on to a couple of weeks from now. But once again, thank you so much for joining us. And those who join us on YouTube and LinkedIn, will, of course, this link will remain live, and hope you can join us in the next episodes. But once again, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Pleasure.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Nikhil. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, cheers all.
Cheers. Thank you so much.